This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the lovely GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host today on this dreary Tuesday. I don't know where I am right now. It's like raining. It's been raining for Actually, quick sidebar. This is going to be very quick. I know this is the intro and everything, but the past 5 days, I live in South Carolina. The past 5 days, I've gone through 5 different weather phenomena. So, it's January. No, it's February. Sorry. It's February. And so, what was it? On Thursday, it was hot. It was like 60 degrees. On Friday, we had... Sorry. Wednesday, it was hot. It was like 60 degrees. Thursday, we had a tornado. Friday, it was just raining again, and we had flash floods and stuff like that. Saturday, it snowed. And now we're back to just normal rain. So I've gone through the entire weather spectrum in the past couple of days, and it is messing with my sinuses and my body just overall. But anyways, we're here to talk about sports. So today on the show, I'm going to be talking about Daryl Morey. He came out and talked about the Rockets at the trade deadline. Then we're going to go on to the Taysom Hill conversation, which I'll go more into that when we get to it. We'll talk about the Mookie Betts trade one more time last time, since the official trade has finally gone through. Then we'll talk about the Duke versus North Carolina game and college basketball in general. We'll also talk about Bob Knight returning to Indiana. And then the last topic of the day, I will do my XFL power rankings. So let's get into it. So, if you don't know, which you should, if you listen to the past couple podcasts, I've talked about this for a while now. The Houston Rockets, they dealt center Clint Capella to Atlanta in a 4-team, 12-player trade, which that is bonkers to me, but that landed Minnesota's Robert Covington in Houston. So, because of this trade, the Houston Rockets immediately became the shortest team in the league. Now this, of course, in the NBA of all places, in basketball of all sports, that drew some attention and it drew some criticism. Because basketball is usually known as a sport where you need tall guys, especially back in the 80s when you had, back with Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem and stuff like that, Shaq. There's always been a big guy dominating the sport. Now, of course, this day and age, there's not really a big guy dominating the sport. The big guys are now able to shoot, and they don't do what they used to do in the 90s and stuff like that. So, the role of the big guy has kind of changed in the NBA over the years. So, the Rockets, they decided to go the completely opposite route of what is usually defined as what you need to do in basketball, which is have tall dudes. I think the average size of the Houston Rockets roster now is like 6'5" or something like that. I don't think they have a single person over 6'5". So Houston, they're going with this. It's drawing a lot of attention. It's drawing a lot of criticism. They have played 3 games so far. In the last podcast on Sunday, I discussed the Lakers and the Suns matchups. The Lakers matchup, they won 121-111, where they almost out-rebounded the Lakers with Anthony Davis and LeBron James and stuff like that. And Russell Westbrook had an amazing game with 41 points. He led the team in rebounds. He had more rebounds. I think he had like 3 less rebounds than Anthony Davis. And Covington made some shots as well. Then they went on to play the Suns, the Phoenix Suns, where they lost 127-91. And that did not go as well as obviously, but Russell Westbrook did not play in that game. So I didn't really count it in whether or not the system works or not, because I think the main player in this system, and the only way to get the system to work, is to have Russell Westbrook use his athleticism and use his speed to your advantage, especially when you're spreading the court out so much, and his ability to get rebounds is also a really valuable skill when you do not have a traditional big man. Sunday rolls around, they play Utah. Utah is a pretty solid team with some great big guys. They lose to Utah 114-113. Now, they lost on a last-second buzzer beater by Bojan Bogdanovic, and so, you can't really fault them there. It happens. You lose on buzzer beaters all the time in basketball, so it's not that big of a deal. So, 3 games in, it's kind of a mixed bag at this point, about how you would expect it. They did have their best win of the season against the Lakers using this format, but then they went on to go the next night and get their biggest loss of the season, their worst loss of the season, to the Phoenix Suns by 30 plus points. Then they played Utah, they played the Jazz, who's a solid team. They lose by 1 because of a buzzer beater. So, the Rockets, of course, tweaked their team to revolve around their playmakers, which is James Harden and Russell Westbrook. James Harden won league MVP. He's been criticized before because he doesn't play defense. He's been criticized because of his tendency to get fouled and stuff like that, which, fair. Those are all fair comparisons. However, adding Russell Westbrook on there, Russell, like I mentioned before, this tactic can work with him. He just needs to be able to play almost every night. This tactic is, of course, risky. Everybody knows it's risky. But everyone does believe they will win a lot of games with this tactic. The Rockets will definitely win a lot of games and definitely make the playoffs, which I mentioned before. This is what I mentioned on Sunday. This is what I mentioned last Thursday. They're going to make the playoffs no matter what. Because first off, they're already like third or fourth in the Western Conference right now. They're going to make the playoffs unless they just have a historic collapse because of this whole ordeal. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to win enough games to at least make the playoffs. But once they make the playoffs, they're going to have a lot of trouble because the playoffs are much more physical. Playoffs rely more on the big men more and more. You're going to have to rely on Russell Westbrook to play constantly. Because this does not work without Russell. Because the one game without Russell where James Harden was the main guy, he scored 30 points, but not like 5 rebounds. Not a lot. It just didn't work. Okay, Russell Westbrook, he has that athleticism. He has the speed to make this work. Daryl Morey said that the players were the ones on his mind when he and his staff made countless calls and sent hundreds of texts and emails last week. Saying such things as Clint Capella was an amazing player and human, and we weren't giving him up unless we felt like it was going to really help us. Capella wasn't a piece to propel the Rockets to the top of the Western Conference. Saying that Harden and Westbrook and the fact that they don't have forever to win a championship and they should win one. So what can I do for them to capitalize on this window of time? So Daryl Morey said that about Russell Westbrook and James Harden, which that is a fact. James Harden, he's had plenty of chances to get to the finals, to the NBA finals, but they always got stopped by the Warriors. And then Russell Westbrook, his best chance was when James Harden and Kevin Durant were all on Oklahoma City. Because ever since those guys left and it was just the Russell Westbrook show, Oklahoma City didn't really do much. I mean, they made the playoffs, they made top seeds, but they never went far in the playoffs. I'm not even sure if they made a Western Conference final since Kevin Durant left. So, these are amazing players, and you do want to build around them, and you do want to see them win a championship because they are very good players. However, I don't think trading your big man was probably the good move here. But they went out and got Covington, who's a 6'7" wing, spent his rookie season with the Rockets. He was named G League Rookie of the Year with the Grand Valley Vipers. Morey states that he wanted to bring Covington back to Houston. He wanted to bring him back for a while now. And the rest of this is just stuff about Morey during the trade deadline. He said that he carries 2 phones during the trade deadline, a BlackBerry because it's easy to type on, and then an Android for everything else, which, really, a BlackBerry? A BlackBerry, really? But anyways, the Rockets, they are all in on the small ball. They are all in. It's been called gimmicky. It's been called crazy. It's also been called genius and everything in between. Morey says that this team is working together, working on key things, and D'Antoni is leading them in the right direction. He said it's exciting. Everyone's on the same page. Everyone wants to make this work to win the championship, which is fair. Of course these guys want to make it work, but is it going to work? In the regular season, it might. Once you reach the playoffs, it's going to be very difficult to beat these teams where it's a much more physical game in the playoffs. The refs let a lot more things fly in the playoffs. They let you play more in the playoffs. So it's going to be very interesting to see the small ball go against more physical teams in the playoffs, especially when they're going to be playing either the Clippers or the Lakers or the Nuggets, something like that. Very difficult teams to play when using small ball. When we return, there's been some chatter on Twitter today about Taysom Hill and Drew Brees and the New Orleans Saints with Teddy Bridgewater and all that. And we will talk about that when we return.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So I was looking on Twitter today, and usually when I'm on Twitter, I just like scroll through, and if something interesting pops up, I'm just like, oh, that's cool, that's neat, that's fun, I guess. Haha, funny, we're making fun of a player who fell on his face or something like that, or we're making fun of a fan base that, I follow, very off topic, actually. So Twitter has this new thing where you can follow a topic. So now I follow NBA topic on Twitter just because, it opens you up to different accounts and different like teams and stuff, especially when something popular is going on. But what I've noticed is that I only get Laker fans now. It is just all Lakers fans. And so I get like 1 billion tweets a day about the Lakers, and I do not. I mean, the Lakers, they have LeBron James. They're a great team. They're one of the top teams in the Western Conference. But I don't care that much about the Lakers to follow all these Laker people. So it's very annoying that all I see on my Twitter feed is just Lakers, 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 Lakers. And it's a bunch of times about the Lakers fans complaining about the media hating them, which is absurd. They complain that the media overreacts whenever they lose and stuff like that, which of course they will. You got LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Everyone's going to overreact when you're not beating the Golden State Warriors record. But I digress. Anyways, I was looking on Twitter and I saw a bunch of tweets about Taysom Hill. I was like, why are people talking about Taysom Hill today? I don't know where the Taysom Hill talk came from. So I investigated. Apparently Pro Football Talk. It is a Twitter account. It's called Pro Football Talk. They usually have some interesting things going on there. So Pro Football Talk tweeted this. If you don't think Taysom Hill is a future star in the NFL, you haven't been paying close enough attention to him. He was the best player on the field for either team in the Saints-Vikings playoff game. The biggest question is if he can stay healthy if used all the time. So, I remember I mentioned Taysom Hill being a possible starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. and I'll mention this right now, right off the bat, because I'm about to. It might seem I'm flip-flopping, but I just want to explain myself real quick. So after the Vikings-Saints playoff game, I did mention that Taysom Hill could potentially be the starting quarterback for the Saints if Drew Brees leaves and they don't re-sign Teddy Bridgewater. Which I'm saying that mostly because they would have no other quarterback, so you're kind of forced to do that. But the reason I said that was because in that game, Drew Brees wasn't really getting anything going, and the biggest pass of the game, for the Saints at least, came from Taysom Hill when he had like a 50-yard bomb I don't think it was for a touchdown, but yeah. So you could say he's a future star in the NFL, but here's the issue. He's 30 years old. He's 30 years old, and he's a gadget player. If you don't know what I mean by a gadget player, that is a player that coaches just kind of put wherever they want you to be because you're so versatile and athletic and stuff like that you can pretty much play anywhere. And that's a fact with Taysom Hill. He plays at receiver. He's played on special teams. He's played on kickoff return. He's played running back, quarterback. He's pretty much played every position other than defensive positions for the Saints, because Sean Payton loves him. Sean Payton loves the versatility of him. And you kind of see stuff like that in the XFL, starting with Quentin Flowers. And you start seeing teams kind of trying to replicate the Taysom Hill, at least in the XFL, not really in the NFL. But I can see NFL teams starting to do that, replicating Taysom Hill. But one thing about Taysom Hill is that he is one of those guys that he will do whatever you ask him to. He doesn't care. He just wants to play football. He will do whatever you want him to. So other teams are going to have a much more difficult time finding a guy with that attitude and that is able to do all these versatile things and stuff like that. Because you can't just take like a receiver like Tyreek Hill or something like that and try to turn him into a gadget player, because he's not going to like that. He's not going to go for that. He's a receiver first. He's not going to do that. So I did mention after the playoff game that Taysom Hill could potentially be the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. And that is still on the table because Teddy Bridgewater is a free agent. He could go anywhere. There's a lot of teams looking for quarterbacks. For instance, the Chargers, the Patriots could potentially be looking for one. Cowboys might be looking for one if they don't get Dak re-signed there. There's a bunch of teams looking for a quarterback, and Teddy Bridgewater is capable enough. Teddy Bridgewater went 5-0 when Drew Brees went down for the Saints. Teddy Bridgewater went 5-0 for the Saints. Pretty much kept their playoff hopes alive. I say that like they weren't like the number 2 seed or whatever, but he kept them afloat. There was nobody else really in that division, that in the NFC South, that could dethrone the Saints, but it helps. Going 5-0 when your starting quarterback goes down, it helps a little bit. So Teddy Bridgewater proved his worth. He played pretty well in those games. And here's one thing about this conversation that I'm going to debunk. Taysom Hill only threw like one pass in those 5 games. So a lot of people are saying that he's better than Teddy Bridgewater, which is just incorrect. I don't think he's better than Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy Bridgewater is obviously better, but Teddy Bridgewater is going to be asking for money when he goes out because he's been injured before. He just got off a rookie contract. That's why he got to sign with the Saints. He hasn't had that big contract yet. And does he deserve a big contract? Probably not, but he's a capable quarterback. And like I said, there's a bunch of teams looking for quarterbacks at the moment. I mean, the Raiders said they might look into Tom Brady if the Patriots don't re-sign him. Why wouldn't they look into Teddy Bridgewater? But anyways, so in that 5-game stretch, Teddy Bridgewater won all 5 games. Taysom Hill threw 1 pass. So some people are saying, for instance, Pro Football Talk, saying he's a future star in the NFL. It's hard to be a future star in the NFL when you're already 30. Especially if you're a gadget player. Because he is correct. Whoever tweeted this is correct. The biggest question is if he can stay healthy, if he is used all the time. Now, first off, if he's going to become the starting quarterback for the Saints, I highly doubt that they're going to put him in the billion different positions that they do now, because That would be absurd for your starting quarterback to be on the kickoff team or something like that. But it is a good question because he is definitely a run-first kind of guy. It seems like he can throw the ball. I think he's good for trick plays. I just don't think he's good for I don't think he's good as a starting quarterback forever. I mentioned that he could be the starting quarterback for the Saints because Drew Brees potentially retiring. He's retiring. He's either going to retire next month or he's going to stay with the Saints. And then if he stays with the Saints, then you're good. Taysom Hill can just be the backup. And you can still put him wherever you need to put him if you don't re-sign Teddy Bridgewater. So Drew Brees could be retiring, and Teddy Bridgewater might be asking for too much money for the Saints to re-sign him. So that leaves the door open for Taysom Hill to be the quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. Now, I'm not saying that he should be the quarterback because he's a future star in the NFL. No, that's absurd. That's bonkers to me. This quote, I agree that if you haven't been paying close enough attention, first off, if you haven't been paying close attention to Taysom Hill, you probably don't know who Taysom Hill is. I feel like Taysom Hill is definitely one of those football guys that football dudes or whatever, like experts only know about, or they pretend they only know about him. And it's one of those annoying things where it's just kind of like, you don't know who Taysom Hill is? Do you even know football? It's like naming, like when someone asks you to name all 5 of your starting offensive linemen on your favorite team. Like I mean, I could probably think about it if I thought hard enough, but I don't really, I'm not thinking of that right off the top of my head. Like, no. Taysom Hill could be a star, but it's very unlikely. He would have to have an amazing year. And this past year, he was used a lot more than he usually does. And he still didn't have that big of a year. He was used a lot more. He had he had a pretty big game against the Vikings because they used him in a bunch of different ways. And he had that huge pass. But that's it. The rest of the season was just kind of meh. I mean, he threw a pass. He ran the ball a couple times. He might have played quarterback a bunch. Wildcat quarterback a little bit, but meh. So what? Big whoop. So I just wanted to stop that in its tracks. Taysom Hill is not a future star. He might become a star, maybe, but I don't think he gets enough touches or plays enough to become a big star of the NFL, especially with Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, guys like that. And, of course, Lamar Jackson. But when we return, we'll talk about the Mookie Betts trade, Part 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
It finally happened. Good Lord. I talked about this trade like 5 shows in a row, I feel like. I'm pretty sure y'all are tired of me talking about it. I'm kind of tired of talking about it. It's just a thing that I have to talk about because it just keeps going. So if you don't know, the original trade was a 3-way trade between the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Boston Red Sox, and the Minnesota Twins. That trade was shelved because the Red Sox balked on the original deal because Brusdar Graterol did not pass whatever review the Red Sox had. The Red Sox wanted him as a starting pitcher. The Twins said, no, he's a reliever. He's obviously a bullpen guy. And the Red Sox was like, oh, but I thought you said he was a starting pitcher. And the Twins were just like, no, he is very clearly a reliever guy. He's pretty good, too. He's got some nasty stuff. He'll be good for your bullpen. The Red Sox was like, no, man, we asked for a starter. Why'd you not give us a starter? And the Twins are just like, we never said he was a starter. He projected as one early on in his career, but now he's not. So the Red Sox pulled out of the trade, and this is after all the reports happened and all the players were notified pretty much. And so now we kind of have this awkward stage where it's like, well, Mookie Betts is still with the Red Sox, David Price is still there as well, and the Dodgers just kind of sitting there and is like, well, Jock Peterson's still here, even though we tried to trade him to the Angels, but he lost his arbitration, so he's not getting paid as much as he thinks he should. And he knows we were going to trade him. It's a crazy situation. The Red Sox basically balked out of this deal. And then the Twins pulled out of the deal because the Red Sox started asking for too much. So this left the Red Sox and the Dodgers to complete the trade by themselves. And they eventually did. They completed it yesterday, Sunday, whatever. They completed it after I finished my podcast on Sunday, the episode on Sunday. But so it's official. The Dodgers, they get Mookie Betts. They get David Price. The Red Sox get Alex Verdugo again. They got Jeter Downs and Connor Wong. Who are these people, you might be asking? Most people ask because baseball is one of those things. Let me explain to you who these people are. Let's start with Jeter Downs. He's the new addition to this deal. So he's a top 100 prospect that the Dodgers acquired last winter in a trade that sent Yasiel Puig and Alex Wood to the Reds. He primarily played shortstop, but he projects to be an at least above average defender at second or third. So the main idea is that the Red Sox might use him to replace Dustin Pedroia at second and have a new guy that kind of steps up. He's probably just an emergency shortstop in the majors, meaning his fielding is not as good as a shortstop should be. He's probably going to be a second baseman. Like I said, he's probably going to replace Dustin Pedroia. He's a promising bat for a middle infielder. He led the Cal League in doubles and homers this year as a 20-year-old who was young for even high A baseball. So this is a pretty young guy. He's projecting well. He's on track to be a pretty good player in the majors, and the Red Sox needed someone to replace Dustin Pedroia with. So there we go. It all worked out there. So move on to Connor Wong. Connor Wong is kind of a different kind of scenario here. He's a utility player that can catch. He plays catcher a little bit. He catches well enough to do it on more than an emergency basis. So like he could start catcher like every fifth game or something like that. Get the other two catchers a break, stuff like that. He can move to other positions, including second or third. So he can play pretty much anywhere at that point. He could also probably play outfield. Probably. He's just a guy who can play any position, and it's one of those utility guys. Since the roster got expanded to 26 players, he's one of those guys that you like to have on your roster because he can play anywhere. Someone needs a break, put Connor Wong in. It's pretty good. He's a power over hit guy. He swings and misses a lot. It's a real problem for him. It's been a problem for him going back to his time at University of Houston. He could be valuable for his ability to back up at least 3 positions. And like I said, that could be moved up to 7. He could probably play first. He could probably play second. He can play third. He could probably play catcher. He could probably play right or left field. Probably can't do the center field, but he can play 7 out of the 9 positions on the field, more than likely. So, not a bad guy to have, utility-wise. This is the kind of guy that you always see on scrappy teams that like have a surprisingly good year, You know what I'm saying? Next up, we got Alex Verdugo. We've already talked about him a little bit. He's an average regular in right field, hits for average, plus defense and left with the arm for the right field. He also has an arm for the right field. It's enough power for 60-plus extra base hits. Might get him in about 4 WAR, which, of course, isn't as good as Mookie Betts, but you're not going to get any better than Mookie Betts, especially at right field. Boston has him for 5 years. 5 years left on his contract, plus the other 2 players, so Verdugo could develop into a pretty good right fielder. Of course, once again, not as good as Mookie Betts, but it's a solid haul for the circumstances. And this is what makes me so angry about this. The Red Sox came out with a better outcome than they did in the original trade. This is a much better trade for the Red Sox, wise. And I feel like it's because they got cold feet, because all the fans were getting angry about them trading Mookie Betts for very little. So I think they made up the thing about not wanting Gratterall, and they made it up just so they can get a bigger haul for Mookie Betts and David Price. Because at this point, if you're the Dodgers, you've already traded for Mookie once. There's no way you're letting him walk away. You're letting him get out of your lives. You already have the organization hyped up. You already got fans hyped up about having Mookie Betts, and you're just not going to let that go. The Dodgers are going to do whatever it takes to get Mookie Betts. They have the deep enough farm system to trade prospects. Like, for instance, Jeter Downs is not a top prospect for the Dodgers. He wasn't one. He wasn't even two. But he would be a top 2 prospect for any other team in the league. That's how good their farm system is. The Dodgers, of course, parted with more than originally they wanted to get the deal done. But like I said, getting Mookie Betts is worth it. He's one of the best players in the league. And you're trying to build that Death Star. You're trying to finally win a World Series that you've been looking after since the 80s, but more specifically since the last 10 years, pretty much, since you've had Clayton Kershaw, since you've had all these players on the Dodgers. They've been trying to win a World Series for the longest time, ever since, I could remember. Every team's trying to win the World Series, but I feel like the Dodgers are always on the cusp of it. They always make the playoffs. They always win their division. They've won their division 8 years in a row or something like that. They're starting to look like the 90s Braves. And that is the best, worst compliment I can give any team. Because the 90s Braves, they won their division. They won their division 15 years in a row or something like that. But they only came out with 1 World Series. They had 3 Hall of Fame pitchers in their rotation for 5+ years. Only came out with 1 World Series. You had Chipper Jones. You had Andrew Jones. You had Fred McGriff. All these guys only came out with 1 World Series. And that's kind of how the Dodgers are turning out. And the Dodgers haven't even won a World Series yet. The Dodgers could have been the team of the 2010s if they could finish. They lost to the Astros in 2017, which is questionable at this moment in time. And they lost the 2018 World Series to the Red Sox, which is, once again, kind of questionable at this moment in time. But the Dodgers, their window is closing. So they got Mookie Betts. And they're trying to keep it open. They're trying to pry that window open. So, other trades that happen around here. Dodgers traded Twins Kenta Maeda for Gratterall. So Gratterall actually ends up on the Dodgers because the Dodgers were like, we could add another bullpen guy. The Twins paid more for Kenta Maeda by adding another outfielder, Luke Raley, to the trade and then got a low-level minor leaguer in the trade. So they gave up an outfielder for getting the same guy. They really wanted Kenta Maeda, apparently. Getting the same guy. I feel like the Twins kind of got screwed out of this deal because the Dodgers got what they wanted. The Red Sox got more than they were getting in the first deal, and the Twins got screwed. The Twins are getting a worse deal than they originally had. So the Red Sox balking screwed over the Twins. Dodgers got what they want, so they don't really care. The Red Sox got better. Ultimate finesse move. Then, of course, the Jock Peterson trade to the Angels got canceled. It is off the table now, which is a very interesting move because the whole reason that Jock Peterson went to arbitration, the Angels wanted to wait for what his arbitration price was going to be because they want to know how much they're going to pay him. He lost arbitration, and then the deal got taken off the table. So he's going to stay on the Dodgers and be a utility guy. He's probably going to play he's not going to play as often as he would for the Angels. The Angels, he'd probably be like an everyday starter. Now for the Dodgers, he's just a utility guy who's going to play every once in a while, every 3 days or something like that. So there it is. Hopefully that's the end. Hopefully there's no more balking on this trade. Hopefully this is the last time I talk about it until I talk about the results of it in the middle of the summer. But when we return, we'll talk about the best rivalry in sports, apparently. Duke versus North Carolina when we return.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
People have been calling it the greatest rivalry in sports, which of course is a pretty absurd statement to make about any rivalry. I've seen it made for many different rivalries. I've seen it made for Yankees, Red Sox, which, no offense, I love baseball, but baseball is not going to hold the accolade of greatest rivalry. I don't care how many great games happened in that series of the Red Sox versus Yankees, postseason moments and stuff like that, which are great. They're great. However, it's still baseball. Not a lot of people are going to be interested in it. Then you go into football. You got Alabama, Auburn, the Iron Bowl. That's had a lot of great moments in the past 5 years, which, of course, it's going to be a recency bias. Everybody's going to talk about. I saw Lakers, Celtics, which that's a great rivalry in like the 70s and 80s because they played each other in the championship all the time. However, they don't really play much anymore. They play like once a year, twice a year, maybe. They're on different conferences. They don't play each other ever. So how can it be a rivalry? I understand the historical point of it being a rivalry, but at this moment in time, it is not a rivalry. You go on to NFL where you have Packers, Bears, the oldest rivalry in the NFL or whatever. It's been 100 years since they've been playing. That just doesn't do anything for me. I feel like the NFL doesn't have the pageantry that college football has to have a rivalry game mean something, because they play twice a year. It really doesn't matter unless the division's on the line, and a lot of times the division's not on the line between those two because the Bears are, yikes, the Bears with Mitchell Trubisky is there. So that moves on to college basketball, where easily the biggest rivalry in college basketball is Duke versus North Carolina. Before this game, their past 100 meetings or whatever, they were 50 and 50. They both had like 7,000, the same amount of points in 100 games or something like that. Something crazy like that. And it's always the biggest rivalry. Everybody talks about it. Both games, the one in Chapel Hill, the one in Durham, they're always talked about. Always talked about, no matter what. And usually it's for good reason. Usually both teams are in the top 10. It's a big game. You got Roy versus Coach K. It's a good coaching matchup. It's a good player matchup usually, and it's Tobacco Road. It's the main event for the ACC. It is there. It is the ACC's thing to have Duke play North Carolina and for it to mean something. Now, obviously, this year it was a little different, as North Carolina is 10-13, 3-9 in the conference, having the worst year I've ever seen North Carolina have in basketball. Worst year I've ever seen Roy Williams have for North Carolina basketball. They've been losing weird games. Like, they've been losing games they usually don't lose. They lost to Clemson at home for the first time in ever. Clemson has never won in Chapel Hill ever, and they finally beat them this year, so that was a big moment for me personally. But so they had freshman Cole Anthony. He was a big guy. He's a big player for the Tar Heels. He was injured for most of the beginning of the year. He came back a couple games back, and it looks like he's going to bring North Carolina back to prominence. And, I mean, they still have a chance to win out and make the tournament somehow. Sneak in, win the ACC tournament, and sneak into the NCAA tournament. However, didn't really work out. Cole Anthony started playing. North Carolina didn't start winning. And, yeah, stuff just didn't go the way they wanted it to go. So, for instance, I think he came back for the Boston College game. They lost the Boston College game 71-70. Then they lost to number 8 Florida State 65-59. And then you have this Duke game. So they were up 13 with 4.5 minutes left on regulation. It's looking good. They are shocking the world right now, which is not really a shock because rivalries, you got to throw the records out the book, man. But Duke was a huge favorite in this game, and of course, in rivalry games, you can't really look at favorites. It's going to be different no matter what happens. But North Carolina came out the gate playing amazing, playing the best game I've ever seen them play. And I was wondering, where's this North Carolina team been this whole year? Cole Anthony was playing good, but then the Blue Devils rallied. Jones had a contested shot after he ran down a long rebound on his own intentionally missed free throw. Blue Devils had to rally from 5 down in the final 20.9 seconds after Tar Heels had seemingly steadied themselves after looking staggered following Jones' jumper. Jones hit a free throw to tie it with 6.6 seconds left in overtime, only to miss the second, but Moore tapped the rebound beyond the three-point arc to be covered by teammate Jordan Goldwire. Jones got the ball and drove to launch an off-balance shot off one foot, missed everything, but Moore flew in behind Kristen Keeling to snatch the ball near the left side of the rim and put it back in to win the game. Last second shot. You've probably seen it. It's been all over sports. It was a pretty great game, great move. It proves that you can consider this one of the greatest rivalries in sports because stuff like that happens. I mean, it's helped by the crazy nature of NCAA basketball, of college basketball, the crazy factor that happens because of college basketball. It helps foster that. So imagine, for instance, Auburn versus Alabama when Auburn got that kick 6 all the way like 5 years ago, whatever. Now imagine an ending like that being more likely to happen and you play twice a year. That's pretty much what Duke, North Carolina is. That's pretty much what it is. As a Clemson fan, I hate both of them. Don't care for either of them. But it is a must-watch event. It's must-watch. You just can't not watch it. But Jones, Cole Anthony, first off, had a pretty good game. 24 points, 11 rebounds for the Tar Heels, who were, like I said, in control for most of the game. But then they kind of undid it with missed free throws and the inability to come up with one or two clutch plays to close the game out, which could be a Roy Williams problem or it could be a player problem. But Jones offered a reminder of how good he can be in big moments. After big man Verney Carey Jr. fouled out, the Blue Devils had to go small with Jones running the point with confidence and aggression. Coach K said he was at another level tonight. He was a stud tonight. North Carolina, of course, their season probably would have been saved if they won this game. They struggled all season long. They found their best mix of Anthony's ball-dominant style with getting the ball consistently in the post, even while playing without their number 3 scorer, Brandon Robinson, due to an ankle injury. They faltered the most critical moments, just like they did in their first home loss to Clemson last month. They went 21-38 in free throws, including 5 of 12. They missed 7 free throws in the end of the game. This was the 100th anniversary of the first basketball game between the teams. They had retro-inspired jerseys, which looked awful, by the way. They look bad. They look like practice jerseys. But But like I said, both teams were matched at 7,746 points going into this meeting. Duke only won by 2, so Duke has now a 2-point advantage going in. So good for them. North Carolina, they move on. They play Wake Forest. Like I said, they're having a tough year. They are 13th in the ACC right now. They're behind teams like Virginia Tech, Clemson, Georgia Tech, teams that usually they destroy. They have no business being all the way down there. Duke, on the other hand, they're second in the conference, behind Louisville, in front of Florida State. They're playing number 8 Florida State. They played number 8 Florida State last night. They're playing right now as I'm recording this. They're winning currently. But yeah, the ACC is looking a little weak this year, weaker than it usually is. Looks like they're only going to get about 3 teams, maybe 4. You have Louisville, Duke, Florida State. Virginia and Syracuse always have a chance of getting in. Virginia's 15-7, Syracuse 14-9. They definitely have a chance to sneak in. Notre Dame, NC State, both 15-8. It's a little iffy. Pittsburgh's 15-9. Then you get into Boston College, Virginia Tech, Clemson, 12-12, 14-10, 11-12. Then you got Georgia Tech. I can't believe I'm saying North Carolina here, but Georgia Tech, North Carolina, Miami, and Wake Forest, season's pretty gone for them unless they're pretty much playing for a better seed in the ACC tournament at this point, and to try to win the ACC tournament and make the NCAA tournament. We'll see how that goes for them. When we return, we'll talk about Bob Knight returning to Indiana and why it's such a big deal.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Before I start talking about Bob Knight, I need to go through the history of Bob Knight, because it really does give you a full view of why this is such an important moment for Indiana and for Bob Knight in general. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. We're going to go to 1971. Indiana University hires Bob Knight as head coach. Knight's second year as coach, Indiana won the Big Ten. Reached the Final Four, lost to UCLA, who was on its way to 7th consecutive national title. John Wooden, best coach of all time, greatest coach of all time. Following season, Indiana once again captured the Big Ten title. Following 2 seasons in 74-75 and 75-76, Hoosiers went undefeated in the regular season, won 37 consecutive Big Ten games, including 2 more Big Ten championships. 74-75, Hoosiers swept the entire Big Ten by an average of 22.8 points per game. However, they lost to Purdue in an 83-82 game where they lost consensus All-American forward Scott May to a broken left arm. May's injury kept him to 7 minutes of play. Number 1 Hoosiers lost to Kentucky 92-90 in the Mideast Regional. Hoosiers were so dominant that 4 starters would make the 5-man All-Big Ten team, which is insane. 75-76, the Hoosiers went the entire season and the NCAA tournament without a single loss, beating Michigan 86-68 in the title game. Immediately after the game, Knight lamented that it should have been 2. 1976 Hoosiers remained the last undefeated men's basketball team. Through these 2 seasons, Knight's teams were undefeated in the regular season, including a perfect 37-0 record in Big Ten games, on their way to their 3rd and 4th consecutive titles in a row behind the play of Mike Woodson. Indiana won the 1979 NIT championship, which of course doesn't really matter that much. Then you move on to the 80s. 80s, more Big Ten championships, made it to the Sweet 16. 80-81, won the conference championship again. and won the 1981 NCAA tournament. That's Bob Knight's second national title with Indiana. They were favorites to win another national championship, but then they had an injury to Ted Kitchell mid-season for the 1982 season. Then it became grim. 85-86 Hoosiers profiled in the best-selling book, Season on the Brink. To write it, Knight granted author John Feinstein unprecedented access to the Indiana basketball program, as well as insights to Knight's private life. Following season in 86-87, Hoosiers were led by All-American Steve Alford and captured share of the Big Ten title. That team won Knight's third national championships, the school fifth, against Syracuse in the 1987 tournament. So, hope you're counting at home. I'm not counting Big Ten championships because that's a lot. But they have 3 national championships. 3. However, in 1993, that would be Bob Knight's last conference championship. Now we move on to the year 2000. Right before Indiana was about to play in the NCAA tournament, Sports Illustrated ran a piece on Knight in which former player Neil Reed claimed that he had been choked by Knight during a practice in 1997. Knight, of course, denied these claims. But less than a month later, the network aired a tape of an Indiana practice from 97 that appeared to show Knight placing his hand on the neck of Reed. In response, the president said he had a zero-tolerance policy in regard to Knight's behavior. But then later in the year, in September, Indiana freshman Kent Harvey reportedly said, "Hey, Knight, what's up?" And then Knight grabbed him by the arm, lectured him for not showing him respect, insisting that Harvey address him as Mr. Knight or Coach Knight, or instead of simply Knight. This was apparently one of numerous complaints that occurred after the zero-tolerance policy had put into place. So, they asked Bob Knight to resign on September 10th. Knight refused. Then they relieved him of his coaching duties effective immediately. His dismissal was met with outrage. That night, thousands of Indiana students marched from Indiana University's Assembly Hall to Brand's home. Brand was the president of Indiana University, burning Brand in effigy. They had a wooden mannequin of Brand and burned it on his yard. Some said he intentionally set up Knight. Some said that. Knight said goodbye to a crowd of some 6,000 supporters in Dunn Meadow at Indiana University. He asked that they not hold a grudge against Harvey, that they continue to support the basketball team. Knight's firing made national headlines, including the cover of Sports Illustrated and around-the-clock coverage on ESPN. Now, of course, after this, he said he does not want to go back to Indiana. No interest, he said in a March 2017 interview on the Dan Patrick Show. He had no interest in returning to Indiana. Dan Patrick said that most of the administration that had fired Knight 17 years earlier were no longer there. Knight then said, "I hope they're all dead." Which is not a great thing to say when you're known as a person who's, angry all the time. So yeah, there you have it. He had stints at Texas Tech. He had stints in Texas Tech where he made some quips. Like at Texas Tech in his introduction press conference, he said, "This was without question the most comfortable red sweater I've had on in 6 years." He improved the program, stuff like that. Then he retired in 2008. And yeah, so why is it such a big deal that he returned to Indiana? Well, after I just read all that to you, it is obvious that Bob Knight had some animosity towards the University of Indiana, or Indiana University, I'm sorry. It's IU, not UI. There's some animosity there. He obviously thinks he should not have been fired. And of course, everybody just thinks of Bob Knight as the old dude who threw a chair onto the court. He did have anger management issues, and there were issues with him and the players. He did kind of abuse players a little bit. Multiple players can attest to that. He has abused them. 20 years after his controversial Inglorious firing in 2000, he took a giant step to reconcile with the program he led and loved. You could tell on his face that this 79-year-old man was flushed with emotion to return to where he thinks is home. Whether or not you agree with what he's done in the past, or whether or not you're a fan of him, or you vilify him, or anything like that, you have to recognize that he's trying to reconcile. He's apparently in ill health. Players have been trying to get him to come for years now. The new administration that is there, that didn't fire him, they're brand new. They had nothing to do with it. They wanted him to return. Everyone kind of wanted to do this before he kicked the bucket. And I'm happy they did. You have closure for longtime Indiana fans. You also have closure for Coach Bob Knight, who's one of the best coaches in college basketball history, whether you like it or not. 3 national championships and 10 Big Ten championships. That's just the number I'm throwing out there. I have no idea if it's actually 10. But stuff like that. It's amazing. Now, however, Dick Vitale put his hand on his shoulder and he just freaking Bob Knight grabbed it. Looked like he was about to punch Dickie V in the face. And a lot of people saying, oh, he was just joking, stuff like that. I don't know about that. He looked like he wanted to punch Dick Vitale in the face. He looked like he wanted to beat him down for even thinking of touching him. And Dickie V, of course, played it off. He was just laughing the whole time, but it looked dangerous. It looked like Bob Knight wanted to punch him in the face. But hey, what do I know? I'm just watching a funny GIF on Twitter. But yeah, so I mean, it's a great story about reconciliation. That's not how you say that, but we're going to go with it anyways. It's a great story about that. It's a great story about a historic coach coming back after an iffy pass, controversial pass. And I'm glad it happened. Glad it happened before he passed away. Before he passes away. He has not died yet. It's just nice to see stuff like that in sports. It was definitely heartfelt for some people in Indiana. It's heartfelt for himself. It was heartfelt for his players, stuff like that. So it's nice to see. He does have a troubled past, though. Next up, we will talk about another thing that has a troubled past, which is the XFL, but we're looking to the future. I have my first XFL power rankings for week 1 when we come back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and one championship. We got the fights covered. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Here it is, folks. Here it is. Every week, on Tuesday, the Tuesday show, every week I'm going to give you my XFL power rankings from this weekend. I'm going to be doing this for all 10 weeks of the regular season. For the next 9 weeks, this is what we're doing. The XFL power rankings. Now, of course, there's only been one game played for every team. So, it's pretty much self-explanatory for the most part why teams are where they are. There's some nuanced things that I kind of put in there that led me to believe that one team was better than the other, but for the most part, the top 4 teams are the teams that won, and the bottom 4 teams are the teams that lost. All right, so it's the first power rankings. I didn't want to make like a preseason power rankings because that makes no sense, because I didn't know any of the players for the most part, and I didn't know the teams. I didn't know how the new rules were going to work, but now that I don't have a good idea. I have a meh idea. I have a scratch the surface idea of everything going on. So we can now kind of dive in, make a power rankings. I'm going to keep it in a spreadsheet. We're going to see how I feel throughout the rest of the season, see if this first one matches with the last one, and we'll see how that goes. Of course, it's probably not going to match with that last one because, there's ebbs and flows to sports seasons, and it's only 10 weeks long, but still there's ebbs and flows. High school football is the same way. So let's start off. Number 1, the DC Defenders, who are I think they were like the third highest favorite to win the league. So the DC Defenders, they had Cardale Jones get a strong showing, going 12 for 26 with a 67% completion percentage. And I should have put the scores on here, so hold on. Let me look up the scores real quick. So the DC Defenders beat the Seattle Dragons 31-19. So Cardale Jones, strong showing, 12-26, 62% completion percentage, and 2 touchdowns. He actually looked really good. He moved around in the pocket pretty well. He had some really good throws on the run. He had some pretty good throws from the pocket. Presley emerged to become the running back of the Defenders. It's kind of a disappointing outing for Pumphrey, who was the running back for San Diego State. He has the all-time rushing record in the NCAA for rushing yards. So it was kind of disappointing to see him not get a lot going, but there's a reason he's not in the NFL. It's because he's kind of small. He's a little smaller than most running backs. But anyways, the Defenders' defense also got in the game. They had 2 interceptions. Of course, one interception was because a receiver slipped on an out route, but they still got 2 interceptions to kind of put the game away for the Defenders. Up next, we have the Houston Roughnecks, who won 37-17. They're number 2 on the power rankings. PJ Walker emerged as an early MVP candidate. He's the February MVP award goes to PJ Walker so far. He's emerged as a candidate. He went 23-39 with 272 yards. He had 4 touchdowns through an interception. He started the game out with a 50-yard touchdown pass. However, it was a pretty quiet night for Sammy Coates, who was a big deal coming in. He used to play for the Steelers. He was a big-time receiver for the Steelers for a little bit. So he was expected to come in here and just kind of wreck the house. But he didn't really do much. He had a couple catches, but nothing too fancy. Defense had 2 interceptions, held LA to 291 yards. And that's impressive because they ran 74 offensive plays. Now, a bunch of these teams have actually ran 70 plays. There's like 3 teams that ran 70 plays. I don't think any of them won. I think St. Louis won, maybe. But held them to under 300 yards on 74 plays. They averaged 3.9 yards. Held LA to 20% on third downs, 50% in the red zone. And then Coney Eagley, who was a first-round draft pick for the Carolina Panthers in 2014, had half a sack, 5 QB hurries, and 2 tackles for loss. Number 3 on the rankings in the New York Guardians. New York Guardians won their game against the Tampa Bay Vipers 23-3. It was a much more defensive battle as the Guardians defense put in some work. They gave up 394 total yards in 71 offensive plays. However, they only gave up 3 points. And now, it's mostly a lot of bad timing for Tampa Bay, and we'll talk about that when we get to the Vipers. It was a lot of bad timing for them, some ill-timed turnovers and stuff like that. They held the Vipers to 47% on third down. The Vipers had 0% in the red zone and goal to go, which, they got 2 interceptions. Scoop and score in the 4th to ice the game to make it 23-3. Matt McGloin had a decent day with 15-29 with 182 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 1 passing touchdown, 1 rushing touchdown. Matt McGloin made some really good throws. New York Guardians are up there. Their defense is kind of deadly so far because I'll talk about the Vipers later. I'll talk to them when I get to them. But the Vipers offense really was kind of churning a lot. Like I said, they just had some ill-timed turnovers. Number 4, St. Louis Battlehawks. Tamu, their quarterback, went 20 for 27 for 209 yards and a touchdown, 77 rushing yards in their 15-9 win over the Dallas Renegades. Now, this was another defensive matchup as the Battlehawks only scored 2 touchdowns. But the Battlehawks are also the only team that had the most rushing yards out of all the teams in the XFL. Rushing was not a thing here in the first week of the XFL when I was looking at the stats. I think only 2 teams had over 100 rushing yards, period. I think that was the Battlehawks and the Vipers. The Battlehawks, Matt Jones, had 21 carries for 85 yards, averaging 4 yards per carry. Their defense for the Battlehawks, of course, was the big story here. They held Dallas to 267 yards, 10% on third down, 0-2 in the red zone. They also had 2 sacks for 26 yards and got 2 turnovers in the game, which helped St. Louis win that one. So Tamu went pretty good in the game. He threw pretty good. St. Louis kind of ran more than every other team, as I mentioned before, and that kind of led them to a victory there. Number 5, we're going to the team that lost to St. Louis, and that's the Dallas Renegades. So, Renegades, they went without their starting quarterback in Jarvis Landry, but they had Phil Nelson coming in. He went 33 for 42, which is not too bad with 209 yards. He threw 1 interception. Didn't rush the ball at all. They had 4 different running backs run the ball. None of them had more than 5 rushes. Cameron Artis-Payne even had a pass for 10 yards. He only had 2 carries, but he had a pass. Defense did okay. They held the Battlehawks to 15 points. Battlehawks had like 350-plus rushing offensive yards. But not much to say about the Dallas Renegades. They just you could tell it just wasn't their day. They couldn't get anything going on offense, and that could be because they had a backup quarterback in and not Jarvis Landry. And I feel like they didn't rush the ball as much as they should have, but that's why I have them at 5, because they didn't really do anything bad. They just didn't do anything good. So that's why they're the top of the losing teams. Then we have the Seattle Dragons. Seattle Dragons lost to the DC Defenders 19-31, and that game was actually really good. It was 19-19, I believe, going into halftime. The Seattle Dragons were keeping up with them. Brandon Silvers made some mistakes that weren't necessarily his fault, and then he got hurt towards the end of the game. Like I said, he threw a pick because the receiver fell down, and I think he threw another pick because it went through the receiver's hands, stuff like that. And then he got hurt towards the end of the game, so the backup quarterback had to go in a crucial drive. He went 21 for 40 for 217 yards with 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Like I said, they were kind of fluke interceptions, not really his fault. Prohl showed up, had 5 catches for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was a big proponent of them staying in the game. Defense gave up 2 fourth-down conversions. Other than that, they did pretty well. They only gave up 295 total yards, and they held the DC to 0-2 in the red zone. The Tampa Bay Vipers are at number 7. Why are they not last, you may be asking. Hold on. They're an interesting team to me. They only scored 3 points, but they had 394 offensive yards. They ran 71 plays. They only got 3 points. They gave up 5 sacks, threw 2 interceptions. Aaron Murray went 13 for 34, 231 yards. He actually didn't play that bad. Like I said, some ill-timed turnovers kind of killed him here. I think they had a fumble. They had 2 picks. They had a fumble. Quentin Flowers came in for a couple plays at the end. He had 34 rushing yards and 37 passing yards. They took Aaron Murray out, which I don't know if necessarily should have done that, but they put Quentin Flowers in for a couple plays. He got sacked at the end of the game to kind of ice the game there. Here's the interesting thing, though. The Vipers had 4 receivers that had less than three or less catches, but 40 or more yards. They had Dan Williams, who had 6 catches for 123 yards. They had Truesdale, who's their tight end. He had 3 catches for 49 yards, but he had the ill-fated fumble that kind of ruined the end of the game for him. Tolliver had 3 catches for 47 yards, and Horn got 3 catches for 42 yards. Their defense also didn't do too shabby. They held the Guardians to 10% on third downs, and they held New York to 226 yards. So if their offense got anything going, they would be much higher up. I would probably put them at 5 if they scored at least a touchdown or anything. Their offense looked impressive, just not good. They just had a lot of ill-timed turnovers, and their defense played pretty well, I feel like. The LA Wildcats were last. They played with the backup quarterback, Knopf. He went 21 for 40, 214 yards, touchdown, interception. They had Spruce, who had 11 catches for 103 yards, 20% on third down, gave up 5 sacks. QB got hit 16 times in this game. They held Houston to 30% on third down, but they gave up big plays that kind of screwed them over in this game because the game was pretty close. It was a pretty close game until about halftime. They gave up big plays like the 50-yard touchdown to start the game, and they gave up a third 9-yard touchdown in the third quarter. And also, they fired their defensive coordinator after one game. So they deserve to be last on the power rankings. They fired their defensive coordinator after a single game, and he didn't even have that bad of a game. But anyways, that is it. That is the XFL power rankings. I'll see you next Tuesday for the week 2 power rankings, which I hope will be completely different because that'll be a lot of fun. But thank you for listening, everybody, to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We'll be back here on Thursday to talk about whatever's going on, and make sure you rate, review, like this podcast if you really do like it. You can follow me on Twitter at Strickland_Josh. You can follow GSMC Sports, GSMC_Sports on Twitter. And please take a listen to any of the other GSMC network podcasts. Spread the love. You know what I'm saying? So see y'all on Thursday. Hope you have a great Tuesday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.